If you ever want to see just how quickly a slice of American suburbia can turn into a courtroom drama, try having your snowblower impounded by the HOA for excessive noise and watch the fireworks. I mean, really picture this. It's February. I'm up before dawn, like always, and I find my snowblower chained to a stake right in front of the HOA office, this bright orange violation tag whipping around in the wind like it's proud to be there. My first thought, no way, somebody's got to be kidding me. I'm Xavier Thornton, and for 6 years I've called Meadowbrook Estates home, a neat little chunk of Neatville, Illinois, where the houses all look like they're cut from the same mold, the lawns are manicured, even under a blanket of snow, and God help you if your mailbox is the wrong shade of beige. Back when I bought my place here, the HOA just seemed like background noise, honestly. A little annoying, sure, but it's part of the deal you trade in the drama of city life for, well, the drama of suburban rules. At least that's how I saw it. The thing about Meadowbrook, though, is it's got rules for everything. Paint colors, how tall your grass can get. There's a whole section in the bylaws just about seasonal decorations, which is a real riot, let me tell you. Anyway, that morning was brutal, one of those cold snaps where the air bites your face off and the snow was up to my shins. I always get up before 5 after a big storm, not because I enjoy freezing off parts I'd rather keep, but because for the last 3 years I've been the unofficial snow guy for Fire Station 47 just up the road. That station, it covers us and about 4 other neighborhoods. When the snow buries their driveway, their engines can't get out, and that delay could cost someone their life. No exaggeration. I started helping them out pretty much by accident. One winter I saw a couple of firefighters out there with shovels hacking away at 2 feet of packed snow, looking about as cheerful as you'd expect. Their plow truck was dead again. I had this heavy-duty Toro snowblower I'd picked up secondhand, so I wandered over and offered to lend a hand. Captain Mike Reynolds, who runs the place, just grinned and said, "You're a lifesaver. We cleared the whole thing in an hour." Mike tried to pay me, but my old man was a volunteer firefighter back in Michigan, and I know how thin those budgets run. Instead, Mike and I struck up this handshake deal. I'd clear the station after every big storm, and in return they'd keep an eye on my house when I was out of town and lend me a hand if I needed one. Good old-fashioned neighbor stuff. So that's the backstory. I'd been doing this for years, never for attention, always before 6 a.m., always quietly as I could. But apparently somebody decided my snowblower was too loud for Meadowbrook's delicate sensibilities. And that's how I ended up standing there in the dark staring at my snowblower, locked up like a criminal with this notice screaming about Community Ordinance 14.7 and excessive noise during quiet hours. Not just a warning, no sir. The letter was clear. Equipment has been impounded pending review by the HOA board. Failure to appear at the hearing may result in fines or legal action. Signed, of course, by the Queen herself, Helen Cartwright, HOA president. Now, Helen, she's something else. She rolled into Meadowbrook about 1.5 years ago, bought the biggest house on the block, and within 6 months she'd bulldozed her way onto the HOA board. Most folks here just want to live their lives in peace, so when Helen started volunteering for everything, people were happy to let her. That relief lasted all of, a couple months. She ran the HOA like it was her private fiefdom. New rules, higher dues, fines for trash cans out 6 hours early. Take your Christmas lights down by January 2nd or it's $50. She cruised the neighborhood in her white BMW, snapping photos like she was building cases for Judge Judy. I kept my head down and followed the rules, figured that was the safest bet. But apparently my early morning snowblowing finally put me in her crosshairs. I called Mike at the station. He sounded exhausted. "You coming by?" "We've got to get cleared before shift change at 7. I told him the news, and there was this long, stunned silence. "You're kidding," he finally said. "I wish. What are we supposed to do?" "The plow's still dead, and there's 3 inches of ice under that snow. I promised I'd try to sort it out, but honestly, I didn't know if I could." So in the bitter cold, I marched over to Helen's office, which is just her finished basement with a new sign. The lights were already on. It was barely 5:30. I knocked, and she answered the door, decked out in athleisure that probably cost more than my car payment. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for this. "Mr. Thornton, I assume you saw the violation notice?" "Yeah, Helen, I did. I need my snowblower back. I have responsibilities." She replied, "Cool as ice, so do I. and mine include enforcing our noise ordinances. I tried to explain about the fire station, how the work was essential, how waiting until 6 would screw up their whole schedule and possibly risk lives. She didn't budge. Rules exist for a reason, she said. If I make an exception for you, where does it end? And when I asked who complained, she got real cagey. That's confidential. But I knew she was probably the only one awake at 5 a.m. besides me. When she shut the door in my face, I just stood there cold and frustrated. I snapped a few photos of my snowblower chained out front just in case this turned legal. Called Mike again, gave him the bad news, and headed to work stewing. I must have read that violation notice 50 times by noon. Each time I got a little madder. That's when I decided enough was enough. I spent my lunch break digging through my copy of the HOA bylaws, this brick of a binder I'd stuffed in a closet years ago. Helen was technically right about the noise rule, but there were carve-outs for emergency services and essential work. And here's the kicker. Nowhere did it say the HOA could just take your property before a hearing. Helen was counting on nobody calling her bluff. After work, I went to the fire station. Mike and the crew had managed to clear the drive, but it took them hours and left everyone exhausted. I explained what I'd found. Mike grinned. "We'll get you a letter from the fire chief. Show him this isn't just some hobby." Sure enough, the chief promised to have an official letter ready by morning. Meanwhile, I started calling around the neighborhood, and man, what I learned was jaw-dropping. Helen had issued over 200 violations in just 6 months to a neighborhood of 80 houses. Most were minor stuff. Trash cans, holiday lights. Some poor family was out $3,000 because their teenager kept forgetting the cans. People were tired, fed up, but afraid to push back. Well, that was about to change. By the time the emergency HOA board meeting rolled around, I had 15 neighbors willing to sign on. Turns out most folks were just waiting for someone to stand up. The board besides Helen were regular people. Donald the treasurer, Margaret the secretary, Tim, and Rebecca, both at-large reps. Helen had just bulldozed over them for months, but now the cracks were showing. The meeting was packed 60 people easy. You could feel the tension, like everyone was waiting to see who would flinch first. I laid out my case, the fire chief's letter, the date of the whole stack of violations Helen had sent out. People started nodding, sharing their own stories. And for the first time, I saw Helen lose her grip on the room. Margaret and Tim backed me up. Even Rebecca stood and called for a review of every fine Helen had issued. The board voted 4-1 to suspend enforcement and start a full audit. Helen's face went pale, but she tried to tough it out. She stormed out, slamming the door, and nobody stopped her. The next morning, every tire on my truck was slashed. I mean, real mature, right? I called the cops, filed a report, and kept moving. Daniel, my lawyer buddy, helped me build my case. Over the next week, the review committee dug through Helen's violations. Turns out she was making half of them up. Fining people for things that weren't even against the rules, faking photo evidence, you name it. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Helen tried to drag the city into it, filing a complaint against the fire station itself, saying they were letting unauthorized people run equipment near homes. It backfired big time. The fire chief and city council sided with us, not her. But that just made her angrier. The night before my violation hearing, I spotted Helen parked outside my house, just sitting there watching. Gave me the creeps. I filmed her car and sent it to the police just in case. At the hearing, I called out the conflict of interest, and the board agreed. Helen recused herself, grumbling the whole way. I presented my case. The board voted to dismiss the violation, and that should have been the end of it. But Helen, she couldn't let go. She stood up red-faced and went off, accused me of undermining her, said I was the reason the neighborhood would fall apart. When the board told her to sit down, she just resigned on the spot, storming out with a warning, "This isn't over, Xavier." And wouldn't you know, 2 days later, I get served with a lawsuit. Helen was suing me for defamation harassment that works $50,000. It was all for show, pure intimidation. Daniel told me not to worry, but it was still a wait. The review committee's final report dropped on the day of the special election. Over 300 bogus violations, $75,000 in illegal fines, doctored evidence. Rebecca Ford was elected president, and her first move was to apologize publicly on behalf of the HOA. New oversight, real transparency. For a while, things were good. But Helen, she still had one card left. My house got broken into, trashed, spray paint everywhere, but nothing stolen. This was about sending a message. The police got involved, and the detective Sarah Morrison was sharp. She dug into Helen's family and found her brother Connor had a rap sheet. Turns out Helen had asked him to scare me, and he confessed after they traced his phone near my house. Helen was arrested as an accessory, charges conspiracy to commit burglary. Now, you might think karma doesn't have an address, but sometimes it just shows up in a police cruiser. The story made the news. Former HOA president arrested for revenge plot. The lawsuit dropped. At her trial, Helen's own brother testified against her. She was found guilty, sentenced to 18 months. Restitution $12,000. When I got the check, I used some for repairs and gave the rest to the fire station. She served 9 months, then moved away to Arizona. Meadowbrook felt lighter. People laughed more. Decorated without fear. Let their trash cans stay out a little longer. I kept clearing snow for the fire station, no complaints from anyone. One morning, Mike and I stood with coffee watching the sunrise, and he said most folks would have just let us struggle. But you fought for what was right. I shrugged. I'm stubborn. He laughed. Stubborn's good when you're fighting the right fight. Thing is, it wasn't just about my snowblower. It was about a community. About not letting a bully rule through fear and fines. About knowing when to push back even if it costs you. Sure, it was stressful, expensive, exhausting. But it mattered. And it worked. Our neighborhood didn't become perfect, but it became livable, fair, ordinary in the best way. The HOA now served us, not the other way around. The funny part, after it was all over, Helen's sister showed up at my door, sat on my porch, apologized for what her sister had done, told me Helen hadn't always been like this. Life happened. Something inside her broke and she started needing to control everything. I listened. I understood. But in the end, she made her choices and people paid the price. That night, as the sun set and kids played in their yards, I realized this is what I fought for. Not just for me, but for everyone who wants to live their life without some petty tyrant breathing down their neck. Not for the sake of being right, but for the sake of being able to breathe. And isn't that the heart of any real community? So here's the thing I learned. If you let bullies run the show, they'll take more and more until there's nothing left but fear and silence. But if you stand up, if you find your voice and use it sometimes justice shows up. Maybe not as fast as you want, maybe not perfectly, but it gets there. I still clear the fire station's driveway, and I still smile every time I hear that engine roar to life in the early dark. Not because I'm looking for trouble, but because I know what's at stake if nobody steps up. And now let me ask you, what do you think? Where's the line between order and overreach? Between protecting a community and controlling it? Have you ever tangled with a little tyrant or stood up for yourself or your neighbors when nobody else would drop your story below? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no community survives without people willing to show up, speak up, and look out for each other, even if it's just to shovel a little snow.